and the ping that changed the world. The sound of metal striking metal echoed through the Springfield Armory workshop as John Cantius Garand adjusted the operating rod of his semi-automatic rifle prototype for the 1,000th time. Outside, the winter of 1936 painted Massachusetts in shades of gray that matched the skepticism in every military official's eyes. He was just an immigrant machinist from Quebec, they whispered. What could he possibly understand about arming a modern military? Yet in his calloused hands lay a weapon that would soon determine the fate of democracy itself. The Great War had ended with bolt-action rifles and the bitter knowledge that firepower meant survival. By the 1920s, military strategists understood a terrifying truth. The next global conflict would be won not by courage alone, but by the speed at which infantrymen could deliver accurate fire. European powers were experimenting with automatic weapons, and America's Springfield rifles, reliable but slow, suddenly seemed as outdated as cavalry sabers. The War Department issued a challenge that bordered on desperation: create a semi-automatic rifle that could give every American soldier the firepower of 10. Garand's fingers traced the rifle's walnut stock, worn smooth by countless hours of adjustment and testing. The workshop smelled of gun oil and metal shavings, familiar scents that reminded him of his father's small repair shop back in Quebec. He'd been just 7 years old when his family crossed the border into Connecticut, carrying nothing but poverty and his inexplicable understanding of how mechanical things wanted to work. "Mr. Garand, the test results are back from yesterday's trials." Colonel Thompson's voice carried the weight of institutional doubt. Garand looked up from his workbench, where springs and small metal components lay arranged with surgical precision. The colonel's expression revealed nothing, but his adjutant clutched a manila folder like evidence of failure. "The prototype exploded again on the 43rd round, Garand. That's the 4th catastrophic failure this month." The words hit like hammers against steel, but Garand's expression remained steady. He had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury an immigrant inventor could not afford. Around the workshop, other machinists paused their work, listening to another chapter in the quiet drama that had consumed the armory for nearly 2 decades. "I understand, Colonel. The gas pressure needs refinement. The operating rod requires—" "What it requires," Thompson interrupted, "is a designer who understands American military needs. General MacArthur himself questions whether this project warrants further resources." Garand's hands stilled on the rifle's receiver. Through the workshop windows, he could see workers hurrying through the February cold, their breath forming white clouds in the Massachusetts air. These same men had watched him arrive 17 years earlier as an unknown laborer, dismissed by supervisors, until they witnessed his almost mystical ability to diagnose machinery failures simply by listening to their rhythms. The prototype rifle seemed to mock him from the workbench. 8 pounds of steel and wood that should represent American innovation, yet continued to fail at the moment of truth. Garand understood the paradox that consumed his life. Creating a weapon reliable enough for muddy foxholes, yet precise enough for 500-yard shots. It was a puzzle that had already consumed the better part of his career. "How many rounds did it fire successfully before the failure?" Garand asked quietly. 42 perfect shots," the adjutant admitted reluctantly. 8-round clips ejected cleanly each time. Accuracy was exceptional. For a moment, something flickered in the colonel's expression. Not quite hope, but recognition that 42 perfect shots represented progress. Garand had been chasing this ghost for 16 years, since arriving at Springfield Armory in 1920, with nothing but his intuitive understanding of springs, gears, and human intention. "The mechanism wants to work, Colonel. I can feel it in the metal. One more adjustment to the gas system. One more failure could end this project entirely," Thompson warned. "The Budget Committee meets next week. They're asking hard questions about funding a weapon designed by someone who never attended engineering school. The unspoken words hung in the workshop air like gun smoke. Someone foreign, someone unproven, someone who doesn't belong. Garand had heard these whispers since childhood, when other children played, while he dismantled pocket watches and farm equipment, studying the elegant relationship between mechanical parts and human purpose. As Colonel Thompson departed with his adjutant, Garand returned to his rifle. The workshop grew quiet except for the distant sound of other projects, machine tools shaping steel, hammers forging components for weapons that would arm American forces if war came again. And war would come. Every intelligence report suggested Europe was fracturing toward another catastrophic conflict. He lifted the prototype rifle, feeling its weight and balance. Nearly 10 pounds loaded, heavy for an infantry weapon, but necessarily robust. The walnut stock felt familiar under his palm, like shaking hands with an old friend who had witnessed both failures and small victories. Somewhere in this maze of steel and precision was the answer. The rifle wanted to fire 8 rounds as quickly as a soldier could pull the trigger, then signal its empty state with some distinctive sound, a mechanical signature that would become as iconic as any battle cry. Outside the workshop windows, Massachusetts winter held Springfield Armory in its grey embrace. But inside, an immigrant machinist continued his patient work, adjusting springs and pressure systems with the quiet determination of a man who understood that democracy's survival might depend on the sound of metal striking metal in perfect mechanical harmony. If stories like this make you question what you do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this workshop, and stay with us for the next chapters. Jean Cantius Garand had learned patience from machines themselves. At the textile mill in Connecticut, his first job after arriving in America as a child, he discovered that mechanical problems announced themselves through subtle changes in rhythm. A bearing wearing thin, a belt beginning to slip, a gear tooth developing a microscopic crack. While other workers waited for catastrophic failures, young Garand listened to the machinery's quiet confessions and intervened before disaster struck. This same intuition now guided his hands as he dismantled the failed prototype for the 100th time. Each component told a story of stress and pressure, of forces trying to work in harmony but frustrated by imperfect engineering. The rifle's gas system, the heart of its semi-automatic operation, needed to redirect a small portion of each shot's explosive power to cycle the bolt. Too little pressure, and the mechanism would fail to eject spent cartridges. Too much, and the entire rifle would tear itself apart. "You're working late again." Dr. Emily Harrison's voice carried gentle concern. The armory's metallurgist had become one of Garand's few allies among the engineering staff, perhaps because she too understood the challenge of proving competence in a field dominated by men with formal credentials. "The gas-pressure equations don't account for temperature variations," Garand replied without looking up from his workbench. Massachusetts winters affected metal expansion differently than laboratory conditions. Dr. Harrison moved closer, studying the disassembled rifle components spread across Garand's workspace like the organs of a mechanical autopsy. Her presence brought the faint scent of the chemistry laboratory, sulfur and carbon compounds that reminded Garand of his childhood experiments with his father's workshop tools. "The Ordnance Committee received another letter from General MacArthur's staff," she said quietly. "They're questioning whether American factories could manufacture such complex mechanisms at scale, even if you solve the reliability issues." Garand's hands paused on the rifle's operating rod. Scale manufacturing, the difference between crafting a single prototype and producing millions of identical rifles for a modern army. He had witnessed American industrial capacity during the Great War, seen how factories converted from civilian production to military hardware with stunning efficiency. The M1903 Springfield rifle, reliable but slow, had armed American doughboys with bolt-action technology that required soldiers to manually cycle each round. "How many rounds can a soldier fire effectively with the Springfield?" Garand asked. Trained marksmen average 8 to 10 aimed shots per minute, Dr. Harrison replied. Why? Garand gestured toward his prototype's 8-round clip, a curved piece of steel that held cartridges in perfect alignment for feeding into the rifle's chamber. This fires 8 rounds as quickly as a soldier can pull the trigger, 40 rounds per minute, minimum, sustained fire without sacrificing accuracy. The implications hung between them like morning mist over the Connecticut River. In the next European war, and intelligence reports suggested when, not if, American soldiers armed with semi-automatic rifles would possess devastating advantages over enemies equipped with bolt-action weapons. A single infantryman could deliver firepower that previously required entire squads. Dr. Harrison picked up one of the prototype's failed components, examining stress fractures under the workshop's harsh electric lights. The metallurgy is sound, John. Your gas system design is actually quite elegant, but something's still causing pressure spikes at the moment of firing. Garand nodded, his mind already racing through possible solutions. The rifle needed to operate like a human heartbeat rather than an explosion. Controlled, rhythmic, reliable. Each shot should cycle the bolt smoothly, eject the spent cartridge, and chamber a fresh round without conscious thought from the soldier. The weapon should become an extension of human intention, as natural as breathing. Through the workshop windows, he could see Springfield's evening lights beginning to flicker on across the Massachusetts landscape. Somewhere in those houses lived machinists and factory workers who would soon produce his rifle by the millions, if he could solve the remaining technical challenges. The weight of that responsibility settled across his shoulders like a winter coat. My father fixed watches in Quebec, Garand said quietly. Tiny springs and gears that had to work perfectly for decades. He taught me that mechanical things want to work correctly. You just have to listen carefully enough to understand what they're trying to tell you. Dr. Harrison smiled at this confession of mechanical mysticism from one of Springfield Armory's most practical engineers. And what is your rifle trying to tell you? Garand reassembled the gas system with practiced efficiency, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon or a concert pianist. That it's almost ready to change the world. Outside, February wind rattled the workshop windows, carrying the promise of spring and the distant rumble of industrial America, preparing for challenges that most citizens preferred not to contemplate. But inside Springfield Armory, an immigrant inventor continued his patient dialogue with steel and springs, pursuing a mechanical perfection that would soon echo across battlefields from Guadalcanal to Normandy. The rifle's stock felt warm under his hands, polished by countless hours of adjustment and testing. Soon, perhaps very soon, this weapon would rest in the hands of young American soldiers facing enemies who expected easy victories over under-equipped opponents. When that moment came, the sound of metal striking metal in perfect harmony would carry the hopes of democracy itself. The breakthrough came during a sleepless night in March 1943. 13 years after Garand first submitted his rifle design for military consideration, he had been dreaming again of the textile mill in Connecticut, where mechanical rhythms had taught him to listen for the heartbeat hidden inside every machine. In his dream, the mill's looms wove fabric with the same steady timing that human hearts pushed blood through arteries. Consistent pressure, controlled release, perfect repetition. Garand sat up in his modest boarding house room 3 blocks from Springfield Armory and understood with sudden clarity what his rifle had been trying to tell him. The gas system needed to operate like a human heartbeat rather than an explosion. By redirecting just enough gas pressure from each fired cartridge to operate the bolt, he could create a weapon that cycled smoothly without tearing itself apart. By dawn, he was back in the workshop, recalibrating the gas port dimensions with mathematical precision that bordered on artistry. The adjustment required removing exactly 0.032 inches of metal from the gas port, enough to reduce pressure spikes, not enough to compromise the cycling mechanism. Doctor, Harrison arrived to find him hunched over the rifle, like a priest conducting communion. "You've been here all night," she observed, noting the coffee cups and mechanical drawings scattered across his workbench. "The heartbeat solution," Garand replied simply, as if this explained everything. The first test firing occurred that afternoon, with Colonel Thompson and a small group of ordnance officers observing from behind protective barriers. Garand loaded an 8-round clip into the rifle's receiver, the metallic click echoing through the testing facility like a promise. He aimed downrange at targets positioned 100 yards away and began firing. Ping! The first shot echoed cleanly, followed immediately by the mechanical sound of the bolt cycling smoothly. Ping! The second shot fired without hesitation, the spent cartridge ejecting in a perfect arc. Ping! 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 5 shots in rapid succession, each cycling flawlessly. When Garand fired the 8th and final round, something magical happened. The empty clip ejected from the rifle with a distinctive metallic sound, a sharp, clear ping that would become as iconic as any battle cry. The rifle had announced its empty condition with mechanical honesty, telling its user exactly when to reload. Colonel Thompson emerged from behind the protective barrier, his expression transformed from skepticism to something approaching wonder. "Fire it again," he commanded. Garand loaded another 8-round clip and repeated the demonstration. 8 perfect shots, followed by that distinctive ping as the empty clip ejected automatically. The rifle had spoken with mechanical poetry, each shot flowing into the next like verses in a song that would soon echo across the battlefields of World War II. "How quickly can you fire all 8 rounds?" Dr. Harrison asked. Garand loaded a fresh clip and fired 8 shots in 12 seconds, 40 rounds per minute of aimed fire from a single soldier. The implications struck the observers like revelation. An American infantryman equipped with this rifle could deliver firepower that previously required an entire squad armed with bolt-action weapons. Within weeks, the first production M1 Garand rifles began reaching American military units. Early reports from training exercises showed mixed results. Soldiers loved the rifle's firepower, but struggled with its unfamiliar mechanisms. The weapon weighed nearly 10 pounds loaded, heavier than the bolt-action Springfield rifles they knew. Ammunition consumption increased dramatically, straining supply lines designed for slower rates of fire. Conservative military leaders used these challenges as evidence that semi-automatic rifles represented dangerous innovation for its own sake. "Soldiers will waste ammunition and sacrifice accuracy for speed," one Ordnance Committee report warned. "The proven simplicity of bolt-action rifles serves American military doctrine more effectively than complex mechanisms that may fail under combat conditions." But Garand understood what the critics could not yet see. American industrial capacity would soon prove capable of producing these complex mechanisms by the millions. Factory workers would take pride in manufacturing a weapon that consistently brought American soldiers home alive. The distinctive ping of ejected clips would become a psychological weapon itself, as enemy soldiers learned to associate that sound with devastating American firepower. Letters from Garand's sister in Quebec arrived irregularly, carrying news of a Europe fracturing toward war. Her husband worked in a munitions factory, producing ammunition for bolt-action rifles that suddenly seemed as outdated as cavalry sabers. "Jean," she wrote in careful French, "the newspapers here speak of terrible weapons being developed in Germany. Pray that your work in America serves peace, not destruction." Garand folded the letter carefully and returned it to his coat pocket. Peace. Yes, that was the ultimate goal. But peace protected by strength, by American soldiers who would never have to face a fair fight. His rifle would give every infantryman the firepower of 10, transforming individual soldiers into forces capable of matching entire enemy squads. In his workshop that evening, Garand listened to the familiar sounds of Springfield Armory, machines shaping steel, hammers forging components for weapons that would soon arm American forces against combat-tested German and Japanese armies. The M1 Garand rested on his workbench, its steel and walnut surfaces reflecting the harsh electric lights like promises kept. The immigrant machinist, who had been dismissed as unqualified to design military weapons, had created an instrument that would help preserve the democratic ideals that had welcomed his family to America. And when young American soldiers carried his rifles into battle, the distinctive ping of empty clips would announce to the world that democracy had found its voice. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. December 7th, 1941, transformed skepticism into desperate urgency. As Japanese aircraft devastated Pearl Harbor and European powers mobilized for total war, the M1 Garand's advantages became undeniable. Reports from training camps flooded Springfield Armory. American soldiers armed with semi-automatic rifles could suppress enemy positions that had pinned down entire squads equipped with bolt-action weapons. Garand stood in his workshop, reading intelligence summaries that Colonel Thompson now shared with him as a matter of national security. German military reports noted unexpected volume and accuracy of American infantry fire during early European engagements. Japanese forces, accustomed to facing British and Chinese troops armed with bolt-action rifles, struggled to adapt tactics against enemies who could deliver sustained semi-automatic fire without sacrificing mobility. The war had validated his life's work, but success brought responsibilities he had never anticipated. Production demands required retooling entire factories, training thousands of workers to manufacture mechanisms more complex than any weapon previously mass-produced. Every day, telegrams arrived from military commanders requesting more rifles, faster delivery, improved accessories. "General Patton wants to meet with you," Dr. Harrison announced, entering the workshop with a mixture of excitement and concern. George S. Patton, Jr. arrived at Springfield Armory like a force of nature, his polished boots clicking against the workshop floors with mechanical precision. Garand had expected a typical military inspection, but Patton approached the rifle with the reverence of a craftsman examining another craftsman's masterpiece. "This weapon has saved more American lives than any medical innovation," Patton declared, lifting the M1 Garand with practiced familiarity. "The greatest battle implement ever devised. Do you understand what you've accomplished?" Garand nodded quietly, uncomfortable with praise that felt too large for his modest sense of himself. He was still the immigrant machinist who had arrived at Springfield Armory with nothing but intuitive understanding of how mechanical things wanted to work. Success had not changed his fundamental nature, the patient listener who heard mechanical confessions in the rhythm of springs and gears. "Every American soldier who comes home alive because he could fire 8 rounds while his enemy fired 1 owes you a debt," Patton continued. "The distinctive ping of your empty clips has become a battle cry. German soldiers hear that sound and know they're facing superior firepower." Through the workshop windows, Garand could see trucks loading rifles for shipment to training bases across America. Young men from farms and factories learned to field strip his weapon in darkness to recognize its mechanical rhythms under combat stress. The M1 Garand had become an extension of American military doctrine, transforming individual soldiers into forces capable of matching entire enemy squads. But the war's demands had also extracted a personal cost. Garand worked 18-hour days, refining production techniques and solving mechanical problems that emerged during mass manufacturing. Letters from his sister in Quebec arrived less frequently, carrying news of European cities under bombardment and families separated by conflict. His own health suffered from stress and exhaustion. The immigrant inventor who had dreamed of mechanical perfection now managed industrial systems that produced instruments of war. "Are you satisfied with what you've created?" Dr. Harrison asked one evening as they reviewed production reports. Garand considered the question while examining a rifle fresh from the assembly line. Its steel surfaces bore the fingerprints of factory workers who took pride in crafting weapons that would bring American soldiers home safely. The distinctive ping of its empty clip would soon echo across Pacific Islands and European battlefields, announcing American firepower to enemies who had expected easy victories. "Satisfaction is not the correct word," he replied finally. "This rifle accomplishes its purpose. It gives American soldiers advantages they need to survive and win. But I created it to serve peace, not to celebrate war." Dr. Harrison understood his complexity, the peaceful man who had designed an instrument of destruction, the immigrant who had armed the nation that welcomed his family. The M1 Garand represented both his greatest achievement and his deepest moral contradiction. Production reports showed staggering numbers: millions of rifles manufactured, billions of rounds of ammunition produced, entire factories converted from civilian goods to military hardware. American industrial capacity had proved capable of producing complex mechanisms at scales that impressed even military leaders, who had initially questioned whether such sophisticated weapons could be mass-produced. Allied forces began requesting M1 Garands for their own troops, recognizing the rifle as a symbol of American technological leadership. Even the weapon's limitations, its 8-round capacity and distinctive reload sound, became tactical advantages as soldiers developed innovative combat techniques around these characteristics. In quiet moments, Garand returned to the original prototype that had failed 42 times before achieving mechanical perfection. Its worn surfaces told the story of patience and persistence, of an immigrant's determination to contribute something valuable to his adopted country. The rifle's walnut stock felt warm under his hands, polished by countless hours of adjustment and testing. Outside Springfield Armory, Massachusetts winter painted the landscape in shades of gray that reminded him of that February day in 1936 when Colonel Thompson had questioned whether an immigrant machinist could understand American military needs. Now the world understood what American engineering could accomplish when necessity met innovation, when an immigrant's mechanical intuition served democracy's survival. The letter arrived on a cold November morning in 1943, addressed simply to John Garand, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. The envelope bore German military postal markings, somehow routed through neutral Switzerland and Red Cross channels. Inside, written in careful English by an unknown hand, was a confession that would haunt Garand for the rest of his life. "Sir, I am Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, captured by American forces in Sicily. I write this in a prisoner camp, with permission from my captors. Your rifle killed my brother at Anzio. The sound of your clips ejecting told us when Americans were reloading. We learned to count the pings and attack during those few seconds of vulnerability. But your soldiers were too fast, too deadly. My brother died hearing that sound, the mechanical voice of American industrial strength." Garand read the letter 3 times before setting it down with trembling hands. "Doctor." Harrison found him sitting motionless at his workbench. The German soldier's confession spread before him, like evidence of crimes he had never intended to commit. "John, what's wrong?" He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it silently, her expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something approaching sorrow. When she finished, the workshop felt oppressively quiet, except for the distant sounds of production. Machines shaping steel for weapons that would kill more German soldiers, more Japanese forces, more human beings who had never meant him personal harm. "This is what your rifle was designed to do," Dr. Harrison said gently. "Protect American lives by overwhelming enemy forces." "I know," Garand replied quietly. But I never expected to hear the enemy's voice. To understand that they learned to count the pings, like musical notes announcing their own destruction. The confession revealed tactical details that military intelligence would find valuable. German soldiers had indeed recognized the distinctive sound of M1 Garand clips ejecting, using those brief moments to coordinate counterattacks. But American soldiers had learned to use even this limitation tactically, deliberately ejecting clips to draw enemy fire, then attacking with bayonets while enemies emerged from cover expecting easy targets. Colonel Thompson arrived that afternoon to collect the letter for intelligence analysis, but Garand had already memorized every word. Klaus Weber's brother had died at Anzio, killed by a weapon designed in a Massachusetts workshop by an immigrant who had never intended personal hatred toward German families. The rifle had performed exactly as engineered, cycling smoothly, ejecting empty clips with mechanical honesty, giving American soldiers decisive firepower advantages. "Are you questioning your work?" Thompson asked directly. Garand considered the question while examining an M1 Garand fresh from the production line. Its steel surfaces reflected workshop lights like promises kept to American mothers who wanted their sons to return home, to democracy's survival against fascist expansion, to the immigrant dream of contributing something valuable to one's adopted country. "No, Colonel, the rifle serves its purpose. American soldiers need every advantage they can possess against combat-tested enemy armies. But I understand now that my mechanical creation has become something larger than engineering. It carries the weight of individual human stories. Klaus Weber's dead brother, American boys who survive because they can fire 8 rounds while enemies fire 1. Dr. Harrison watched him disassemble a rifle mechanism with the same patient precision he had demonstrated for 23 years at Springfield Armory. His hands moved with surgical certainty, understanding every spring and gear through touch rather than sight. The immigrant machinist had become America's premier small arms designer, but success had revealed moral complexities he had never anticipated. That evening, Garand wrote his own letter to Klaus Weber, though he knew it would never reach its intended recipient through wartime censorship. He wrote in careful English, explaining that the M1 Garand had been designed to end wars quickly rather than prolong human suffering. Semi-automatic rifles concentrated firepower so effectively that conflicts resolved faster, with fewer total casualties than prolonged battles fought with inferior weapons. "I am sorry for your brother's death," Garand wrote. "My rifle was designed to protect American lives, not to celebrate killing. If superior firepower shortens this war by even 1 day, it serves peace by ending destruction sooner. But I understand that engineering solutions create human consequences I never intended." He sealed the letter without mailing it, filing it alongside Klaus Weber's confession in a desk drawer that already contained dozens of similar testimonials. Letters from American soldiers thanking him for weapons that had saved their lives. Reports from field commanders describing tactical advantages that turned hopeless situations into American victories. Production statistics showing millions of rifles manufactured, billions of rounds of ammunition produced. The M1 Garand had become more than a mechanical achievement. It was the sound of American industrial democracy responding to existential threats. Its distinctive ping echoed across battlefields from Guadalcanal to Normandy, announcing to the world that free societies could outproduce, outdesign, and outfight totalitarian regimes when survival demanded maximum effort. But late at night, in his modest boarding house room 3 blocks from Springfield Armory, John Cantius Garand lay awake, remembering Klaus Weber's careful English and wondering whether the immigrant machinist, who had learned mechanical mysteries from textile mill rhythms, truly understood the weight of what he had created. The rifle had given American soldiers the firepower of 10, exactly as the War Department had requested in 1920. But it had also given one immigrant inventor the responsibility of knowing that his mechanical poetry would echo in the nightmares of enemy soldiers who counted pings like funeral bells. Victory in Europe came with church bells ringing across Springfield, Massachusetts on May 8, 1945. Victory in the Pacific followed 3 months later, silencing the last echoes of global conflict. John Garand stood in his workshop, surrounded by production reports showing the final numbers: 5,068,772 M1 Garand rifles manufactured during the war years. Each rifle had fired an average of 200 rounds. The mathematics of survival and destruction calculated with industrial precision. The immigrant machinist, who had been dismissed as unqualified to design military weapons, had created the instrument that armed American victory. General Eisenhower called the M1 Garand the weapon that won the war. Military historians would later recognize it as the rifle that gave American forces their crucial edge, transforming individual soldiers into forces capable of matching entire enemy squads. But personal recognition came slowly, almost reluctantly. Garand had developed his rifle as a government employee rather than an independent contractor, receiving neither royalties nor widespread public acknowledgement during the war years. He continued his quiet work at Springfield Armory as newspapers celebrated other heroes: generals and admirals, bomber pilots and infantry commanders. Dr. Harrison found him one autumn morning in 1946, disassembling a rifle mechanism with the same patient precision he had demonstrated for 26 years. The workshop felt different now, quieter, less urgent. Production had shifted from wartime manufacturing to peacetime maintenance, from creating weapons for immediate survival to preserving tools for future security. "There's someone here to see you," she announced. Klaus Weber stood in the workshop doorway, dressed in civilian clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame. The German soldier whose letter had haunted Garand's nights now faced him across workbenches where American rifles had been perfected. His English remained careful but fluent, marked by the formal precision of someone who had learned the language through necessity rather than choice. "Mr. Garand, I am Klaus Weber. I wrote to you from the prisoner camp." Garand set down his tools and studied the man whose brother had died at Anzio. Weber appeared younger than expected, perhaps 25 years old, with the hollow expression of someone who had witnessed too much destruction. His presence transformed the workshop into something resembling a confessional, where technical achievements met human consequences. "I came to thank you," Weber continued, his words carrying unexpected weight. "Thank me? For creating the weapon that killed your brother?" Weber moved closer, examining the M1 Garand mechanism spread across Garand's workbench. His fingers traced the rifle's components with professional understanding. The operating rod, the gas system, the 8-round clip that had announced reloading moments to listening enemy soldiers. "Your rifle ended the war faster than any prolonged conflict fought with inferior weapons. My brother died at Anzio, yes, but your semi-automatic rifles convinced German commanders that American industrial strength could not be defeated through attrition. We surrendered sooner because continued fighting seemed hopeless against enemies who possessed such decisive advantages." The confession struck Garand like revelation. The M1 Garand had served peace by demonstrating American capacity to outproduce and outfight totalitarian regimes. Superior firepower had shortened the war by convincing enemies that continued resistance would only multiply casualties without changing ultimate outcomes. "I have been studying your rifle's development," Weber continued. "The gas system design, the manufacturing techniques, the production numbers. American factories produced these complex mechanisms by the millions, while German industry struggled to maintain basic equipment. Your weapon proved that democratic societies could mobilize industrial resources more effectively than fascist states." Garand understood now what he had truly accomplished. The M1 Garand represented more than mechanical innovation. It was democracy's answer to existential threats, proof that free societies could match totalitarian efficiency when survival demanded maximum effort. The distinctive ping of ejected clips had announced not just American firepower, but American industrial democracy responding to challenges that threatened civilization itself. Weber reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small metal object, an empty M1 Garand clip, dented and worn from battlefield use. I found this at Anzio, near where my brother fell. I kept it through the prison camp, through repatriation, through the long journey to America. I wanted to return it to the man who designed the rifle that taught us respect for American engineering. Garand accepted the clip, feeling its familiar weight and dimensions. 8 rounds had once filled its curved interior, 8 opportunities for an American soldier to survive combat, to return home to family, to preserve the democratic ideals that had welcomed immigrants like the Garand family to America. "What will you do now?" Garand asked. "Study engineering in Berlin, help rebuild Germany as a democracy. Perhaps design tools for construction rather than destruction." They shook hands across the workbench where American military power had been perfected. 2 men who had never met, connected by mechanical poetry that had echoed across battlefields from Guadalcanal to Normandy. The immigrant inventor and the defeated soldier, both understanding that weapons served larger purposes than their creators initially envisioned. Years later, as Garand aged into quiet retirement in Springfield, Massachusetts, he would often hold Klaus Weber's empty clip while listening to evening news reports from around the world. The M1 Garand rested in museums and private collections, its steel surfaces still bearing the fingerprints of young men who had carried it through the most consequential battles of the 20th century. The sound of metal striking metal in perfect mechanical harmony had changed history. But the immigrant machinist who had learned patience from textile mill rhythms understood that his greatest achievement was not the weapon itself, but the proof that democratic societies could preserve freedom through industrial strength guided by moral purpose. In the end, it wasn't the weapon that endured. It was the immigrant who had dared to imagine an American soldier who would never have to face a fair fight, and the former enemy who had learned to respect the industrial democracy that had outproduced fascist tyranny through the patient work of immigrants who believed in America's promise. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.